Hi, everyone. Woohoo! We're back. It's so great to see you all. Thank you so much for coming. I love South by. This is just so awesome to be back together, and especially today because we are going to be talking about social health trends and predictions and why connection is the new frontier. So, first I want to get to know you a little bit and see who's in the room, okay? So you're going to need to put down your phones because I'm going to need you to clap when what I say applies to you, okay? So clap really, really loudly if you live in the US. Okay? Clap really loudly if you traveled from outside the US to come here today. Wow. Amazing. How many of those are Brazilian? Oh my God, that's hilarious. I love it. Okay, clap really loudly if you saw my keynote last year. Okay, cool, helpful. All right, what about clap if you work in education? Okay, welcome. What about tech? All right, what about HR, workplace culture? Okay, wow, this is great. This is a really diverse group. And then clap really loudly if you would describe yourself as a social health innovator. Okay, that's not loud enough, so by the end of this session, we're all gonna be clapping to that. Okay, last question. Clap really loudly if you're excited to be here. Yeah, me too. Okay, so in our time together, we are going to start off with a quick primer on social health. This will be a refresher for those of you who were here last year or who are familiar with my work, but it'll also be a primer for those of you who are new to the topic of social health. Second, we are going to talk about trends and breakthroughs. So we're going to look back at the past year and some of the most important highlights and moments and research that have happened. Third, we're going to talk about needs and opportunities, so looking ahead at some of the most promising ways that you and all of us can have impact on social health. Then I'm going to share a collective call to action, the message that I want you to carry with you throughout South by, but also when you go back home and return to your jobs and to your lives. And lastly, we're going to do Q&A, so make sure you're submitting questions throughout the presentation, and we'll have time for that at the end. Let's dive in and talk a little bit about social health and what it is that I mean when I say this. The first thing to note is that we typically talk about our health as physical and mental, but that's actually a mistake because thousands of studies with billions of participants, literally, over decades, have shown that connection is about so much more than just mental health. Right? Connection is essential for mental health and happiness, yes, but it's also essential for physical health and for longevity, right? So just talking about connection under the umbrella of mental health is missing its broader significance. Research shows that people with strong social relationships enjoy fewer depressive symptoms, stronger immune responses, better cognitive functioning. They have a lower risk of things like heart disease and more serious diseases and illnesses, and they have a longer lifespan. And on that last point, the research on social health and our longevity, right, our mortality risk, is really fascinating. So just last year, the OECD estimated that loneliness and a lack of regular interaction account for up to 871,000 premature deaths each year. People lacking strong family ties or frequent social contact, for instance, are up to 53% more likely to pass away from any cause. So we really need to take connection much more seriously and lift it up in the spotlight of how we think about health. And that's what brings me to this idea of redefining health as not just physical and mental, but also social. So social health is the dimension of your overall health and well-being that comes from connection. So if you think about physical health as about our bodies and mental health as about our minds, social health is about our relationships. So the metaphor I've often used over the years is to think about your overall health and well-being as a temple. And this social health pillar is absolutely essential. It's built up from human connection. And these three pillars, physical, mental, and social, they're interconnected, right? So if one is weak, the whole structure could collapse. But also, if you strengthen your social health, that benefits your physical and mental health, and vice versa. It's all connected. Now, this social health pillar has just been missing from the conversation for far too long. And when I first came across this term in the research almost 15 years ago, I could barely find anything about this. I'd never heard of it before. I'd heard about mental health, but not social health. And I realized at that time that whereas physical and mental health were well established, social health was basically missing from mainstream language. But as we're going to talk about in a little bit, that is very quickly changing. So just to make this a little bit more concrete, what does it look like to be socially healthy? Well, social health includes regular interaction with a variety of people, including your loved ones, but also casual acquaintances, even complete strangers. Social health includes close, satisfying relationships with family and friends, with people who know you best and who care about you the most. Social health includes a sense of community and belonging to a group that's bigger than just you. And social health includes having a good relationship with yourself, because connection with others starts from that foundation of connection with ourselves. Now, social health does not necessarily mean socializing all the time. So all of my fellow introverts in the audience can just breathe a sigh of relief. I'm not going to tell you that you have to socialize all the time. Quality is much more important than quantity. So that is a very quick explanation of social health, but I'm going to leave it there. I just wanted to get us on the same page about this language and what I mean. But if you want to dive in deeper, I've got tons of free resources about this that you can check out on my website. For the purpose of today's session, we are going to move into exploring the latest trends and breakthroughs that are emerging in this field of social health. Okay, so let's dig right in and talk about trends and breakthroughs. So I'm very excited to talk about this because what I am observing is that social health as a concept is on the rise. It is moving from the margins to the mainstream. And last year, I made some pretty bold claims about this that I only have myself to blame for. In Wired, I said 2025 will mark a turning point when people worldwide finally recognize that health is not only physical and mental, but also social. My TED Talk came out last year, and I said, over the next decade, I believe social health will become so ingrained in our collective consciousness, equally as mental health is today. And right here on the South by stage, I said 10 years from now, social health will be completely woven into the fabric of our culture. So the question is, oh, hang on. I also predicted social health is today where mental health was 10 to 15 years ago, but not for much longer. So the question is, am I crazy? Maybe. Or are these bold claims actually on track to come true? So there isn't just one kind of perfect data point to actually answer that question, but I'm going to share with you multiple indicators and kind of interesting milestones and reflection points and signals that we can look at from the past year, and I'll let you decide. So the first is Google searches, right? Google searches for social health around the world reached an all-time high just recently. So this gives us a sense of people's interest in this topic around the globe. Another example, this graph shows how often social health has appeared in millions of digitized books over time. Now there's a bit of a lag on this data, but again, even since last year, you can see that trend continues to go up. This graph shows scholarly works in academic publications that have social health in the title. And here again, you can see them continuing to grow. And you can also see the countries around the world that are publishing on this most commonly. This graph shows an analysis of both search trends and also social media data about social health over the past years, showing what they call exploding growth. Okay, so online conversations are taking off as well. So these are pretty interesting signals, right? But I saved the best for last. So remember this? Social health is the missing pillar? Well, in June of last year, my colleagues at the World Health Organization published a landmark report declaring social health the missing pillar and adopting that framework. This is a major global milestone for our collective work because it shows that social health is finally being recognized as a top priority equal to physical and mental health. It's very exciting. It's exciting for all of us. It's validation of our work and our interest in this topic. But it doesn't stop there. Social health was also declared one of the top global trends shaping industries and culture in 2026. So that's according to VML's This is the Future, or the Future 100 report, rather, which is an annual forecast based on a survey of over 15,000 people around the world and interviews with over 60 experts across sectors. They said, and I quote, "The next trillion-dollar wellness economy is built on connection." They also said the question isn't whether social health will reshape industries, it's who will be leading the charge. More bold claims. So what this tells us is that, we're shifting the language, right? There's been so much buzz in recent years about loneliness as an epidemic, and I usually try to avoid that term because it is kind of debated in the research whether it really is an epidemic. But regardless, right, we're seeing that there's now this shift underway in the language that's being used toward this empowering and growing social health movement. But before we get ahead of ourselves, we still have a long way to go, right? Most people still have not even heard of social health. And if you compare searches for mental health, right, there's much more awareness about mental health. You can see, although interestingly, it's also spiking. And if you look for social health on Wikipedia, there's no page about it, right? So that's, again, another signal that this isn't still fully mainstream. But that's actually a really exciting thing. So this graph that you see here is called the law of diffusion of innovation. It's how new ideas, products, and behaviors spread through a population over time. And what it shows is that you've got the innovators with any given new idea. You've got the innovators who champion it first. You've got the early adopters who are right on in there with it, adopting that idea or product or whatever it is. And then there reaches this tipping point, and that's the orange arrow that you see, where all of a sudden there's enough of a buzz and a critical mass, where there's enough social proof so that the early majority buys in as well. And from there, we see the rest of the population follow through. So I believe that we are right around that tipping point, where social health is going to go from the margins into the mainstream, from those of us in this room who are the innovators and the early adopters into the rest of the majority. It's pretty exciting. So that's some of the trends and kind of emerging milestones that have happened in the last year. But what about our social health? And what is the data actually telling us? So I want to nerd out with you on some of this research. And I'm going to start with the bad, and I'm going to start with the US. So here in the US, the latest data from the last year is showing that 16% of Americans say they feel isolated or lonely all or most of the time. It's totally normal to feel lonely sometimes, but when it's all or most of the time, that's really worrisome. We also see that 67% of US adults never participate in clubs and organizations. So earlier when I said part of being socially healthy is belonging to groups and to communities, 2/3 of people in the US are not doing that. And 20% of Americans spend time in person with the people they care about only 0, 1, or 2 times per year. Isn't that staggering? People are only spending in-person time with the people they care about besides the people they actually live with up to 2 times per year, 20% of Americans. I find that fascinating and a huge problem that we need to solve. But it's not all bad news. There's some good news from the last year too. Here in the US, we see that 1 in 2 adults say they hardly ever or never feel lonely. Okay, pretty good. A lot of people not ever feeling this. We have 72% of Americans who feel a sense of belonging in their community. Great, love that. And we have 62% who feel satisfied with their relationships, be it with family, with friends, with neighbors, with other connections that they have. Okay, so there's both bad and good going on here in the US, but what about around the world? So globally, we see that 1 in 6 people feel lonely. That's a stat from the World Health Organization. But what really matters is how severe loneliness is and how chronic it is, right? That matters a little bit more. So that's why I find this statistic really interesting. 5 to 14% of people worldwide feel lonely always or often in certain countries, in the US, in the UK, in Canada, and Japan. And lastly, 8% of people worldwide have 0 close friends. 8% might not sound like a lot when we're talking in percentages, but in absolute terms, that's millions of people, right, who have 0 close friends. But once again, it's not all bad news. There's also good news around the world. 90% of people say they have someone to rely on when they need help. This one's interesting. So 8 out of 10 is the average satisfaction people feel with their personal relationships. It's on a scale from 0, not at all satisfied, to 10, completely satisfied. So people are generally satisfied with their relationships. And lastly, 62% have someone who loves them and makes them feel wanted. I want 100% of people to feel like they have someone who loves them and makes them feel wanted. And I don't think that's an unrealistic goal. We should be able to get to the point collectively where every single person alive feels like someone loves them. There are other interesting signs going on. So on the left here, you can see a graph of over the last 20 years in the US. The amount of time that people have spent attending or hosting a social event has declined by 50% on average. So here you can see the breakdown by age. And on the right, you can see that over the last 20 years worldwide, the percent of people who saw family and friends in person on a daily basis has declined as well. So we're spending less time together. We're socializing less often. Another fascinating example of this graph on the left is a little older, but I love it because it's so telling. This shows the percentage of people who say they grew up having daily meals with their families. And you can see that the silent generation, it starts out at 84%, and then it gets lower and lower and lower with every generation until you get to Gen Z with only 38% of people having daily meals with their family. What is going on? Why are we not eating with our families? Another example of this, more recently, new data saying that 3 in 4 restaurant orders are not eaten in a restaurant. This seems like pretty low-hanging fruit to me, right? We need to start eating together again. So we are socializing less, but we want to socialize more. So this is fresh from February of this year. Google searches just reached all-time highs for how to make friends, where to meet people, friend app, social clubs, and community events. People are searching for this. They're hungry for connection. And this also means that their social health pillars are not as strong as they could be. And that brings me to needs and opportunities. So, last year in 2025, I'm very grateful to have traveled to 7 countries and 30 cities with clients and partners across industries, having conversations about social health, working to improve social health. From places like Japan to Brazil, I know you're all here, right? And so what I've done to kind of gather together these needs and opportunities is draw out some of the most common themes that keep coming up and that I think are particularly urgent and promising. And I've structured these needs and opportunities around the places where we spend the most time. So the first place is schools, right? When we're growing up, we spend a lot of time at school. So what I'm seeing in the data time and time again is that youth are the loneliest generation, right? You see this over and over, more than any other age group. And in my book, I wrote about examples like mandatory empathy classes in Denmark, or initiatives to create a connected campus in Canada. There's a lot going on. I'm sure those of you from EDU, many of you are working on this. Where there's a need and opportunity here is that we need more of that, right? We need to mandate teaching social health skills in schools. We already mandate gym class. Why are we not mandating connection class? We need this information. If we're teaching kids to strengthen their physical bodies, why would we not teach them to strengthen their social muscles as well? Honestly, I think this is the #1 way that we could completely change the course of social health for future generations. It needs to start from a young age. So where there's a need and an opportunity here is that there are some workplace programs to improve social health in the workplace, but not that many. And I believe that every single team, whether remote, whether hybrid, whether in-person, full-time, should have an internal social health strategy. Does anyone here have one of those? Like one person? Okay. So next year when I'm back, I want everyone's hand raised. I think that the future here is creating socially fit teams, whether big or small, remote, in person. It has to be. The third opportunity and need here is that we spend a lot of time online. And what I'm seeing is a huge influx in the amount of investing in private equity and money that's going into startups, apps, new tech platforms to help people connect. There is so much innovation going on in this space in particular. And right now, meanwhile, we're in the midst of this reckoning, right, with social media. We have Australia, who's banned it for people under 16. We have other countries following suit. And meanwhile, while we're reconciling all that and trying to build new tools, along comes AI. Are we sick of AI yet? No? Just me? Okay, that's fine. Well, we got to talk about it, right? Because AI companions are here. 49% of Gen Z has already formed a meaningful relationship with AI. What? That is crazy. 37% of Gen Z can see themselves falling in love with an AI companion. What? This is mind-blowing to me. Now, these are much higher than I see for other age groups, right? So this is especially an emerging trend among Gen Z, that there's a comfort there with developing that emotional intimacy with AI companions. So this is a big topic. I'm not gonna have time to go into all the details about it here. On Monday, I am gonna be speaking on a panel with leaders from OpenAI, from the United Nations, from Frontier Collectives. You can join us at that if you're interested. But the bottom line is, where there's a need and an opportunity here, whether it's with AI, whether it's with social media, or all the new tech platforms that are emerging, founders and investors in this space need to be solving for how these tools support our social health rather than sabotage it. Because right now, we're seeing both, but I'm very worried about the sabotaging taking place. When I first started studying AI companions for my book, I was researching that in 2023, 3 years ago, and already there were hundreds of millions of users turning to AI for companionship. So imagine now, and imagine another 3 years from now. 4, the last place where we spend a lot of time is where we live, right? In our communities and in our neighborhoods. So what I'm seeing is that some of the best solutions, they're not tech forward, they're not sexy and cool and new, they're grassroots, they're hyper-local. They're nonprofits and community-based organizations and inspired individuals who see an opportunity to connect people locally and are going for it. If you've read my book, you've heard about the super neighbors in Paris, a really cool example of this, or the community connectors in San Francisco. I could list hundreds of thousands of examples of local initiatives to connect people and improve social health within a given community. But where there's a need and opportunity here is to keep supporting and investing in those more, right? We're spending so much on the tech solutions, and some of those are going to be great, but we need to allocate some of that funding to these community initiatives. So part of the reason that that community lens is so important is because people are craving in-person connection, right? Gen Z declared 2026 the year of analog, right? We're sick of digital, we're going analog, in-person without our phones. And the research is so clear that in-person human connection has unique benefits, right? There's nothing better than what we're doing here in Austin together this week, connecting and hugging and laughing and creating memories together, right? Getting dopamine from people instead of pixels. We need more of that. So this trend of people using tech so much, but also this backlash against it of wanting to go back to our fundamental need to connect in person, this is going to have implications for brands across industries. Even taxes. I just saw an ad for an online tax service that is now offering in-person tax consulting for the first time ever, right? Even the tax companies, you guys, are prioritizing in-person human connection. The rest of us need to catch up to them. All right, so with these various needs and opportunities, whether that be in school, at work, online, or in our communities, I want to close with kind of a call to action for you to think about, okay? And by the way, feel free to submit questions as I continue to talk through this. In recent decades, we have seen that mental health has gone from the niche to the mainstream, right? We've seen the same trend with now a booming industry that has emerged around mental health. And much of that innovation has been really, really positive because it's given more resources and support and access for people who need it. But not all of it has been positive, right? There have been examples of exploiting on that need for mental health for profit. And that's kind of the risk that comes up, right? When social health now is in that same position that mental health was 20 years ago, and that industry around it is just starting to burgeon, there's both a very exciting opportunity there, but also a risk and a true responsibility that we have to do it right. So when that VML report that I mentioned earlier, that declared social health one of the formative trends of 2026, when they said the next $1 trillion wellness economy is built on connection, I gotta be honest, I felt trepidation. I should be really excited because I have been catalyzing and advocating for social health to rise up for years. But it makes me a little nervous about the potential risks here. And so in my keynote last year, I predicted that every sector will be disrupted by social health innovation, and I stand by that. Right now, we are seeing that start to happen. We're seeing the early architecture of this new market category that's going to influence hospitality, workplace strategy, consumer technology, healthcare delivery, urban design, taxes apparently, right? But we need to steward that transformation really thoughtfully. And this group right here in this room and watching online, you are the leaders and change makers in your industries. Collectively, we reach many millions of people in countries around the world. And so I want to share a story for inspiration. So recently, I saw an ad for a friend-making event where you basically go and you hang out with a bunch of strangers and you do these different activities and hopefully you come out of it with a friend. So obviously I signed up. I love this stuff. It's also my job, but I love this. At the end of the event, we had this nice time, did all these different conversation prompts and so on, and then at the end, we gathered back together and shared, got a little more vulnerable and shared why we were all there. And it was really beautiful and it was eye-opening. People really opened up. and a couple stories stuck with me. One was a woman in her 20s who shared that she had been online for so many years, with school being online through COVID and then online learning and then working remotely, that she felt anxious making eye contact. She said she didn't feel comfortable having in-person conversations. And so she was there that night to try and stretch that social muscle a little bit. Another woman in her 40s said that she lived alone, that she wasn't dating, she wasn't married, and she didn't have any friends. And the problem is that, as we've seen from the data, there are men and women of all ages in all countries who feel like those two women do. But what this tells me is that I want to keep those women in mind. I want to keep anyone in mind who's feeling that way. And I'm asking you to do the same. Here at South by and when you go back home, I want us to lead the rise of social health with integrity and with compassion. And now that if social health is officially, so it seems, going from the niche to the mainstream, we're right at that tipping point, we need to ensure that this movement is grounded in evidence and ethics. I want to turn this emerging trend into an enduring foundation. And that requires doing it thoughtfully. I believe that we can have a future where social health is so woven into the fabric of our culture that no one feels like those women do. I believe that 100% of people can feel like they have someone who loves them. I think that's possible. Not saying it's easy, but I think it's possible, as long as we do it together. What do you think? Are you with me? We need a bit more. Are you really with me here? Come on. So we are going to move into Q&A. I know there were questions before we even started, so I'm excited to dive into all of this with you. But I do just want to share a few examples of ways that we can continue this conversation. So while they're bringing those questions up, here are a few ways that we can stay in touch. The first is that I have a newsletter. That is the best place to get ongoing updates about social health and to stay connected. The second place is that my website has tons of free resources about social health, tons of articles, tons of videos, and so on, so you can check those out and share them. And then the last place is I'll be signing books right after this session at 5:15 down the hall, so make sure to come there. Okay, let's dig into the questions. All right, let me see. What are the most promising innovations you've seen globally that are actively improving social health? If I'm going to be honest, they're usually not the sexy ones, right? They're usually not the tech ones. It goes back to that idea of community-based initiatives. So I mentioned the example of hyper neighbors or super neighbors in Paris, right? This is people who've gathered together and said, we are going to make it the norm for us to know all of our neighbors. And they have programming, and they have WhatsApp groups, and they have all this infrastructure that they've built to make that happen. I see initiatives like that around the world, and that gives me so much hope, because it's not just that they're effective, it's that any of us has the ability to do something like that, to make a difference in the places that we live in. Okay. Isn't social health just a subgenre of mental health? I'm so glad you asked this. No, it's not. Easy answer. But the reason why, right? Go back to this idea that physical health is about our bodies, mental health is about our minds, social health is about our relationships. The impact of relationships on our health and well-being is so big, right? There are few things that so many researchers agree on as much as they do the power of connection for our health and well-being. So because of that outsized impact, we need to consider it its own pillar. It absolutely is, and it needs to stand in the spotlight and shine. So many interesting questions, wow. How do pets like dogs and cats impact social health? I get this question a lot. You know, Anything that helps us feel connected is good. So I love pets and animals, fully support it. But there is something unique about humans, right? We need each other. So I'm sorry to anyone who just wants to hide away with your pet. You gotta get out there sometimes. If we treat social health like a vital sign, what would be the closest equivalent, there we go, of heart rate, the 1 or 2 core signals you want on a health dashboard? I love this question. There is increasingly work being done to prescribe connection in the medical context. This is called social prescribing. So we're going to see more of thinking about social health like a vital sign in the years to come. But what I would say is it's very subjective. So this is going to need to include talking to people, right? Asking them questions. Because you can't look at someone and know how socially healthy they are. It could be that someone's the life of the party and socializing all the time and yet feels really disconnected. Or on the flip side, it could be that people don't spend that much time with other people, but they have a few core relationships that are really meaningful to them, and they're very socially healthy. So it's going to include asking people about both the quantity and the quality of their connections and how satisfied they feel with that. So many questions. Wow, this is exciting. Okay. Sorry, I'm just reading through these. Oh, this is a good one. In the social health data referenced today, how did neurodivergent people report feeling about their social health compared to neurotypical participants? I love this question. I just contributed a commentary to a textbook about autism and social connection that will be coming out in the next year. Neurodivergent people, as I'm sure many of you can know better than me, have different skills, right? Different ways of relating to other people and forming relationships. And so what it means to be socially healthy for someone who is neurodivergent is going to be different from what it means to be socially healthy if you're more neurotypical. Do you have any non-obvious tips to exercise the social muscle? Fun. Okay. Non-obvious tip is to do an act of kindness or volunteer, right? It seems counterintuitive because you're doing something for someone else, but actually we see time and time again that kindness, volunteering, getting involved, caring about other people actually makes us feel more connected, and the gift goes to the giver as well as the recipient. In fact, there was a study by researchers that compared acts of kindness done over a month, and they looked at how lonely those people who did them felt at the start of the study and then at the end. 1 in 10 felt lonely at the start, 1 in 20 felt lonely at the end. So just the act of showing up for neighbors, helping people carry their groceries, having simple chats with someone across the fence, that was enough to actually significantly reduce their loneliness. Why would big tech companies be interested in supporting and co-creating solutions that strengthen social health? That's a good question. I used to work in big tech. I love tech, right? I was at Google within Verily for 3 years, leading community engagement for a health platform. I don't think these have to be at odds at all. I think that big tech, anyone working at any company, right? We all share the same desire for meaningful human connection, to live lives that are happy, to have our kids grow up and be healthy and live good lives as well. And so I think that we all want that. So it's a question of how are we aligning incentives with the products and tools that we're building to support that. I've noticed that many people seem increasingly reluctant to engage in relationships and also avoid conflict of ideas. What is driving this behavior? Yeah, this is a really good question. What I hear from people over and over is that relationships are messy. It's hard, right? We get hurt, we hurt other people, we disagree. there's so much that goes into human connection that doesn't feel good as well. And so I think that people are reluctant to engage in relationships sometimes because of that, because of not having the tools and the skills to know how to work through that. And also because so many people are overwhelmed and burned out and exhausted. And so sometimes it feels like too much, like we have to just focus on our own needs first. So I think that's a really big part of it. And this is one of the reasons that I believe we need to be teaching some of these skills from a young age. Is social health a matter of country culture? Countries in South America and Africa seems not to be affected by that. Okay, I love this question. This is personally something I'm so interested in exploring right now. How does social health look different in different cultures? And all you Brazilians who are in the audience know, right? If you're in a country and a culture that's more collectivist, where there's social norms around community, where it's very family-oriented, where people in general are more extroverted, what social health looks like and the expectations for how you are going to be in relationship to other people are going to be very different than, for example, if you live in somewhere like Japan, where I spoke to people and they told me, we are introverted. That's self-described. They're saying we're shy. We don't open up and have relationships in the same way. I met someone who lived there 20 years and could count on one hand the number of times she'd been invited into a local's house, right? So there's very different cultural norms, and that shapes both how we feel and how we act. And I think it's fascinating. How do you think AI could have a positive role in increasing social health? Awesome question. So the way I'm thinking about this right now is that if AI is being used to support our human relationships, that's a green light. So examples of this could be, using AI to figure out your calendars with the people who you want to connect with on a regular basis, and having it organize those hangouts so they're on your calendar with the reservation made and your plans are there, and all you need to do is show up and connect with that person. I think supporting human relationships could also look like practicing difficult conversations, right? And running through a few scenarios to then go have that conversation in person. So that's another example of supporting. I also think that when AI supplements human relationships, that's a yellow light. So what I mean by this is when people are turning to their AI companions as one of the many sources of connection in their life, I think there's a role for that. I think that that can be okay in certain circumstances, and that because being socially healthy means having a variety of interaction, AI companions can be one of those. Where I see a red light is when AI is being used to substitute for human relationships, right? So when people are using AI companions as their only or their main source of connection, that is not socially healthy and something that we need to be really attentive to. So green light if it supports human relationships, yellow light if it supplements human relationships, red light if it substitutes for them. Okay, what is the number one thing we can all do today to immediately improve our social health? Be intentional. Be present in your interactions with people. I think the number one thing is just making this a priority, and that starts with setting that intention, right? How does the lack of social skills in our communities affect dating? So I didn't include stats on dating in my slides, but it was really interesting to me to read a lot about this recently, right? So we're seeing that Gen Z is dating way, way less. We see that they are leaving the house less. They're drinking less, right? Maybe that's a good thing, actually. But they're also not going out and having those relationships that is a normal part of growing up. I think part of that is a lack of social skills, and that's something we can address. I also think part of it is a reaction to the pandemic, right? And coming out of that experience that we collectively had and feeling a bit of inertia, getting stuck, right? Not going through that really important phase of learning and practicing social skills in person. How is social health and the loneliness epidemic impacting senior generations and longevity? Yeah, so absolutely. It is a really sensitive time when people transition from working full-time to retiring and suddenly being in a position where they're not seeing their coworkers day to day, right? And as we get older, we lose that source of connection from work. We also start to see that our friends and loved ones are passing away. That can be a really difficult time. And so a lot of older adults do feel disconnected. But like I mentioned earlier, the highest trends around loneliness are among youth and among Gen Z. You guys have this is amazing. I'm really enjoying these questions. I can't believe how many there are. Okay. In the workplace, how to support someone with social health problems without confusing it with something professionally inappropriate. Yeah, I'm not exactly sure what's meant by this, but here's what I will say. How we connect, who we choose to open up to, who we choose to be vulnerable with and have conversations about this with, we need to be selective, right? And in certain workplace contexts, it's not appropriate to ask about social health or to try and get to know someone on a more personal level. And so I think there's a certain amount of judiciousness here that needs to happen for in any kind of professional context. What is the impact of constant human interaction with AI platforms on social health? There's not a lot of data on this because this is such an emerging trend and such an emerging phenomenon. But I'll tell you this, we can learn from social media, right? And the impact that that's had on social health. It hasn't been good. It means that we've often treated social media as a crutch and relied on it rather than meeting in person. And it's left a lot of people feeling lonelier, feeling more disconnected, right? Feeling envy and FOMO and all these kinds of emotions. I think where AI comes into the picture, we're going to see that it's going to be easier for people to connect with AI than real humans. Back to what I was saying about human relationships can be messy and really, really difficult. And so sometimes it's going to feel like that's a really nice option to get our emotional needs, at least at the surface level, met, rather than doing the hard work of connecting with other people. So I think that's something I'm very worried about in the years to come. Can you talk a bit about social health in Japan? Yeah, so I spent 2 weeks there last year. My book came out in Japanese, and I absolutely loved it. I found the culture so fascinating. And people, like I said, shared with me that Japanese people are more introverted. They are shyer in general, right? Not everyone, but that tends to be one of the cultural norms there. And so I was really struck by things in the architecture even. So walking along in Kyoto, all the windows are closed up. They've got these shutters. It's very stylistic. It looks really cool, but it even gives off this idea of not being welcoming, right? Of kind of closing people off. On the other hand, you have a phenomenon called moai, I believe I'm pronouncing that right, where people from a young age are matched with other people as a kind of support group. And they go through life together, continually supporting each other. And there's expectations and norms about how that inner circle will be with them throughout life, right? So you can see kind of both positive and negative examples of how the culture within Japan can be affecting people's social health. What insights does this give us in regards to people who identify as or are labeled socially awkward? Can we just clap if you've ever felt socially awkward in your life? I definitely have. I still get socially awkward, for sure. So I think one of the most promising things that I've learned in studying social health is, first of all, that most people feel this way, at least some of the time, that a lot of people are really insecure about connecting and in our relationships, but also that the research shows that actually people like us more than we think, and people appreciate hearing from us more than we think. And we're all going around wanting more friends and feeling socially awkward. We're all feeling that way. If we just let that go, it would alleviate a lot of the stress around connection and help people to connect better. One of the most powerful ways for people to overcome loneliness is to change their mental models, to go into circumstances and into social situations assuming that people are going to like them, or letting go of the kind of guardedness that prevents us from connecting in a more meaningful way. What about the weather? How does that shape loneliness? I have no idea. I like that question. Probably warmer weather is associated with better social health, but I don't know for sure. If technology is pushing us toward greater isolation, should social health become a public policy priority? Yes, it should, and it already is in many countries. So years ago, the UK and Japan both appointed ministers for loneliness, but many other countries since then have begun creating social health strategies. They're not necessarily calling it that. It's often guised around loneliness. It's often talked about as social connection, but essentially they are prioritizing this. The benefit here is that it's creating a national awareness and a national decision that this is something we care about, and it also means allocating resources to social health. So I absolutely support that. Okay. I am going to stop there. I want to thank you all. This was really fun. And my parting words for you are that over this next week here at South by, practice strengthening your social muscles, right? Strike up conversation with each other, have so much fun. And I really hope that you go back to your homes and into your jobs and the lives that you live, committed to leading social health and the rise of this movement with integrity and with compassion. Thank you all.